This sermon is based on the book that I read by Kyle Idleman, and I encourage you to read it. It's called Not a Fan, Becoming a Completely Committed Follower of Jesus. It's a great book, it's a great read, and there are some amazing ideas in this book. When we look at the Bible, we find that following Jesus must be at the center of Christian life. It is the absolute center of Christian life. There is no way around that. We are called his disciples or his followers. We all like to talk about the Great Commission because the Great Commission, Matthew 28, tells us what? Go and do what? Make disciples or followers of all nations. And this is our main verse, and we talk about this passage. But before we make disciples of other people, we must first become the true followers of Jesus Christ ourselves. Amen? Before we go and make disciples of other people, we must first become followers of Jesus Christ. The Bible shows a clear contrast between the true followers of Christ and his fans, the fake ones, the fake followers. It is evident from the Bible that Jesus had a lot of followers, but he also had a lot of fans. When we read the New Testament, we can see that many times the gospel writers tell us that huge crowds were following Jesus Christ. I want you to open your Bibles with me this morning in John chapter 6. This is one of the occasions that we read about huge crowds following Jesus Christ. We're going to stay in this chapter for a little bit here in the beginning of the sermon. John chapter 6, and I'm starting in verse 1. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Verse 2, then a what? A great multitude or a great crowd followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. So we see this occasion. If you read later until verse 14, we see that Jesus is talking to this big crowd, probably that grew up to over 5,000 people by this time. It was a huge crowd. And after a full day of teaching, Jesus knows that the people are getting hungry, right? So what does he ask? He asks the disciples to find something for these people to eat. So Andrew, one of the disciples, finds a little boy that had what? Had just a lunch with him, right? 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Jesus performs a great miracle, and he feeds the whole crowd with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. After the dinner that was served to these people, the crowd decided to camp out the whole night so that they can be with Jesus the next morning. Wouldn't you say that these are some big time followers of Jesus Christ? They stayed there the whole day. They camped during the night just to be with Jesus. The next morning when the crowd wakes up, what happened? Jesus wasn't there anymore. If you read in the story following chapter 6, Jesus wasn't there anymore. He went in a boat with his disciples. He went on the other side of the lake. Now, by this time when they woke up, they were hungry again. But Jesus is nowhere to be found. These people are hoping for encore performance. They want another huge miracle. They want to eat again. Eventually, they realize that Jesus and his disciple have crossed over the sea to the other side of the lake. By the time they catch up with Jesus, the Bible tells us the story. They got into the boats and they went to catch up with Jesus. By the time they catch up with Jesus, they are starving by now because it's probably late. They missed the opportunity to order breakfast. Now they want to order lunch. If you read in the Bible there, verse 26, these people wanted to see what's on the lunch menu, but Jesus saw their true motivation. In verse 26, Jesus says this following words. Jesus answered them and said, Mostly assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you what? You ate of the loaves and you were filled. This is what Jesus is saying. I know why you're following me. Are these guys true followers of Jesus? No, they're not. They're just some fans that admire Jesus because of the food that he provided for them. And Jesus saw through that and he says, you are not following me because you want to be with me. You're following me because you ate and now you want to eat again. And you want another miracle. Jesus knows that these people are not going to all the trouble and sacrifice because of him. In verse 35, if you skip to verse 35, Jesus offers himself to these people as the bread of life. It says here, and Jesus said to them, I am what? The bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. Suddenly, Jesus is the only thing on the menu. There is nothing else. Jesus offers himself as the bread of life. The question is, will Jesus satisfy these people? Will it be enough? Would Jesus be enough for these people? And here's what we read at the end of the chapter. This is a very sad description of what happened that day. John 6, verse 66. It's 666. It's just a coincidence, all right? Don't take it as a gospel truth. It's just a coincidence. It says here, from that time, many of his disciples did what? Went back and walked with him no more. When they missed the opportunity to have another miracle, to eat again, what happened to them? They just stopped following Jesus Christ. So the question is, were these people true followers or just fans of Jesus Christ? There were some big-time fans of Jesus Christ. They were fans of Jesus Christ. Now, it's interesting to see in this chapter that Jesus does not send his disciples or doesn't go himself and start chasing after these people saying, hold on, let me perform another miracle for you. He doesn't do that. He seems to be okay that his reputation plummeted. He didn't really care about that. You know why? Because this is the main point, and I want you to remember that. The main point here is that it wasn't for the size of the crowd that Jesus cared. It was their level of commitment. And that's what Jesus cares about. He didn't care about the size of the crowd. He didn't care to please everybody and feed everybody. He wanted to see their commitment level. He wanted to see, are they true followers or not? Or they're just there because Jesus performed a miracle. When the question is asked of us, are you a follower of Jesus? Many of us are very quickly to respond, yes, I am a follower. But I'm not sure if we really understand what we're saying. I want you to go to Matthew with me in chapter 7, verses 21 to 23. We all know this verse. But I would like you to look at this. Matthew 7, verses 21 to 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I what? Never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. This passage tells us of a day when many of those who consider themselves to be true followers of Christ will be stunned and shocked to find out that Jesus didn't even know them. These are big-time followers of Jesus Christ. Or so they thought they were followers of Jesus Christ. It wouldn't surprise me when I was reading this verse, these 3 verses, to see maybe Jesus said a few, maybe some, but how many does he say? Many. will say to me in that day. He doesn't say just a few. I expect you to see in this verse maybe just a few. When I look at this congregation and I read this passage, Jesus says many. And that scares me. Because it's not just a few that I can count on one hand. It's not just some of them. It's many people that will tell. Many people that thought that they were true followers. Their whole life they thought they're doing work for Christ. Will find out in that day that they were just fans of Jesus and not true followers of Jesus Christ. There are three questions in this passage that we must consider. And I want you to remember those questions. Question number one. Does your life reflect what you say you believe? Does your life reflect what you say you believe? In verse 21, if you go back, Matthew 7:21, it says, "Not everyone who says to me, but those who what? Those who are doing things." So Jesus is playing on words here. He's contrasting the word says with the word does. You see that? He's contrasting those two. We live at a time when we have become increasingly comfortable separating what we say we believe with how we live our lives. We have convinced ourselves that our beliefs are sincere even if they have no impact on how we live our lives. You might say you are a follower, but have you done the things that the person you are following is expecting you to do? You might confess Jesus as your Lord. You might say, Lord, Lord. You might confess Him as your Lord, but are you living the life of your Lord today? Kyle Idleman, the author I mentioned, he says, "We are saved by God's grace when we believe in Jesus and put our faith in Him. But biblical belief is more than something we confess with our mouths. It's something we confess with our lives." A biblical belief is something that we confess with our lives. We show that in our lives. There is a tendency to define yourself as a follower based on how you feel about Jesus, but following requires more than feeling. Following requires action. James 2:17 says, "By faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by works, by action, it's what? It's dead." So you might confess Jesus, say, Lord, Lord, haven't we this and that? But those are different things. If only you confess Christ with your words and not put it into action. That's what Jesus says in verse 21. There will be some of those people at His second coming that mistakenly believed that just by professing Christ, they have an entrance into the kingdom of heaven. Someone once said, a belief, no matter how sincere, if not reflected in reality, isn't a belief. It's a delusion. So many fans today of Jesus Christ just live a delusion and they will miss out on the kingdom of heaven. Do you fit into that category? I want you to seriously think about that. Are you just the one that says and not doing anything? Then you will fit into this category. Question number 2 from Matthew 7. Do you think you are a true follower just because of what you've done? So that's the other side. In verse 21, Jesus deals with this. He says, not just those who tell me and confess me as Lord, but those who are doing things are my true followers. Then in verse 22, he deals with another misconception, with the other extreme, where people just think that just by doing things, they'll enter into the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus is saying, that's another delusion. That's another misconception, and I want you to be very careful about that. Now listen to this in verse 22. These people that will hear Jesus saying that he doesn't know them, they will say to Jesus on that day, we did what? We prophesied in your name. We drove out demons. We performed miracles. Their confidence is in their righteous acts and their good deeds. That's where their confidence is in. One of the ways you know you're more a fan than a follower is that when you're asked, are you a follower, your mind immediately goes to the fact that you do good things. If somebody asks you, are you a follower? And if your mind goes right away to the things that you do, then that's wrong. You would think for yourself, of course I'm a follower. I go to church every Saturday. I give tithe. I volunteer. So if your mind goes straight to what you're doing, Jesus is saying that's not a true follower. And we need to be very careful because that's how we justify ourselves sometimes. Of course I am following Jesus. Of course I'm trusting him because of this, this, and this, and this. And Jesus said that's not the way to do it. I want you to see this hypothetical example that Jesus chooses in Matthew 7 because they're somewhat surprising to me. How many of you are prophesying in this congregation here? As far as I know, we don't have too many prophets here. How many of you are healing people and casting out demons? Wouldn't you say that these are some extraordinary things that people do? It's not a regular thing that Christians do. So you might be a little bit disappointed saying that if these people cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven, I do not stand a chance with what I am doing. But Jesus is doing this on purpose. He's choosing these examples on purpose, these extraordinary examples, because it's an intentional effort on Jesus' side, because he wanted to make it one thing clear to us. No matter how much good you do, no matter what you accomplish for the kingdom, that's not what makes you a true follower. And that's what Jesus wants to get across to us. No matter how much good you do, no matter if you prophesy or heal people, no matter what you accomplish, that's not how you become a true follower of Jesus. So there's two extremes here in verse 21 and 22. First, people think just by professing Christ, they're okay and they don't have to do anything else. Others fall into the other extreme by thinking that by doing things, and this was the mistake of the Pharisees. They thought that by doing things they will enter. And Jesus kind of destroys both of those in first two verses. But there is the third question. The third question is from this passage, do I know Jesus and does he know me? That's the most important question that we need to ask. That's what it comes down to in Matthew 7. That's the dividing line that Jesus identifies. In verse 23, he says to these big time fans of his, he says, I never what? I never knew you. I never knew you. So it comes down to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's very simple. It's not the works we do, it's not our profession, but it comes down to a personal relationship with Jesus where you know him and he knows you personally. We want to put the emphasis on what we say and do, and those things are more because those things are more measurable, right? They are tangible. We can see those things. We can measure them. I volunteered 3 times. I read my Bible 4 times. So those things are measurable. They're tangible. That's why we like to measure our, relationship with Christ by those things. But Jesus identifies his true followers based upon an intimate relationship with him. What we say and what we do overflows out of the relationship we have with Jesus Christ. So, where do we start in determining if we are true followers of Jesus or not? There's 2 things that the author is giving in this book, and I'm going to present them to you this morning. The first thing is called Define the Relationship Talk. Have you heard about that before? A DTR talk. I didn't know about it. I've done it before, but I didn't know it's called that way. A DTR talk, it's Define the Relationship Talk. This talk takes place in any relationship, they say, at one point in time where you want to define where is your relationship going, right? You're dating someone or you're seriously, maybe you're seriously considering marriage. And at one point you come in time that you say, we need to define where is our relationship going, all right? And you have this talk, define the relationship talk. you think about questions like, is it a casual relationship or is it committed? Have things moved past infatuation and admiration and towards deeper devotion and dedication? And this talk determines the commitment level of each person. So today, Jesus is inviting you to have this talk with him. We talked about it, that a true follower is determined by his relationship or her relationship with Christ, not by what they're doing or confessing. So if you want to have a good relationship with Christ, you come to a point where you're not sure about your relationship with him, you need to have a talk with Christ. You need to have a talk with him and ask, where do we stand, Lord, in our relationship? Is it a committed relationship or is it just a casual thing? Is it just something Jesus wants to know about this relationship? Is your relationship with Jesus exclusive? Is it just a casual weekend thing, or has it moved past that? What exactly is your level of commitment with Jesus Christ? I know that many people define their relationship with Christ just on a weekend, Sabbath thing. Can you have a good relationship with your spouse if you give them only one day a week? Say, honey, Wednesday is your day. Do not bother me on other days. Can you really have a good relationship with someone if you give them only one day a week? No, you can't. But how we have come to believe that we can actually have a good relationship with Christ by just giving him one day a week and only a few hours. And many Christians are just fans of Jesus Christ because they have come to believe that once a week it's enough. My relationship with him is defined by 3 hours that I spend in the church every Saturday morning. So this is where we start in determining whether we are a follower or a fan of Jesus Christ. The second point is that the next step in determining whether we are true followers or just fans of Jesus is to use accurate measurements to define our relationship with Christ. You know that fans are using a highly subjective method of measurements. And let me explain to you what they mean by that. Number one method of measurements they're using to define relationship with Christ is spirituality comparison. Have you heard about spirituality comparison? In comparison, you compare yourself to other saints in the church. Or compared to so-and-so, I am a saint. That's a very subjective measurement. They say, comparing to so-and-so, I am a saint. And fans use that. Why? Because they make themselves look better comparing themselves to others. They look at the commitment level of others around in their church, and they feel like their relationship with Jesus is solid. But who do we have to compare ourselves to? With Jesus Christ. If you compare yourself with other people in the church, you failed. You are not a true follower of Christ. You're just a fan of Jesus Christ because you want to make yourself look better. Have you noticed that when we compare ourselves to others, as a rule, we almost always put ourselves up against those who are spiritually weaker than ourselves. Have you noticed that? As a rule, you'll never compare yourself to those who are higher in your spiritual life. Because why? You'll be disappointed. But you usually, as a rule, compare yourself with others that are weaker in their spiritual life because you want to look good. So please, do not use spirituality comparison. Do not compare yourself with other people in the church. We should measure up only against whom? Against Jesus Christ. That's it. Another measurement that fans are using, and it's a wrong one, it's called religious ruler. They point to their observance of religious rules and rituals as evidence that they are really followers of Jesus Christ. And I've seen that done many, many times in churches. People say, after all, Would a fan go to church every Sabbath and put money in the offering and volunteer and live a good lifestyle and so on and so forth? I observe all the rules that the church has in place. So I must be a follower. I cannot just be a fan of Jesus Christ. I must be a follower of Jesus Christ. But remember what Jesus told to those people in Matthew 7:22. No matter how much you do, is that really showing that you're a follower? No. Jesus wants to know the commitment level you have, and he wants to see where's your relationship with him. Now here's the most basic definition of a fan in the dictionary. A fan is an enthusiastic admirer. Remember that. I've seen lots of people enthusiastic in the church, and I've seen lots of people admiring Jesus Christ. Imagine a sports fan, a football fan. You've seen some of those around, right? Imagine a person that is a die-hard fan of Calgary Stampeders, to say. You see those guys at the games with no shirt on, and you see the Calgary Stampeders logo, on their chest. You see those guys cheering in the stands and yelling and supporting. He sits in the stands and cheers for his team. He just sits and cheers, but he's not part of the team. He's never in the game. Where is this fan? He's in the stands. He's sitting and cheering, but he's never part of the game. He never breaks a sweat, or he never takes a hard hit in the open field. He knows all about the players. He can give you all the stats about the players, but he does not know personally those players. He yells and cheers, but nothing is really required of him. There is no sacrifice he has to make for the team. I think that Jesus has a lot of fans these days in our churches. Fans who sit safely in the stands cheering every Sabbath, but they know nothing of the sacrifice and pain of the field. Fans of Jesus who know all about him, but they don't know him personally. But Jesus was never interested in fans, in enthusiastic admirers. He is interested in true followers. The concern that I have today is that many of our churches today have gone from being sanctuaries, and they have become stadiums, where the fans are coming and sitting and cheering, and that's it. And then they go home a few hours a week, and then they go home, and nothing is required of them, no sacrifice they're making for the team. That is why we're having our ministry fair today, so that you can find out how you can get involved in the life of the church. Not just to admire once a week what's happening in the church and cheer and praise God and then go home, but become a part of the team. Kyle Idleman said in his book, and that's the last quote I'm going to quote from this book, the biggest threat to the church today is fans who call themselves Christians but are not actually interested in following Christ. They want to be close enough to Jesus to get all the benefits, but not so close that it requires anything from them. And this describes a lot of our members today, unfortunately. The Russian comedian Yakov Smirnov said when he first came to the United States from Russia that he wasn't prepared for the incredible variety of instant products available in American stores. He said, on my first shopping trip, I saw powdered milk in the store. You just add water and you get milk. Then I saw powdered orange juice. You just add water and you get orange juice. And then he said, I saw baby powder. And he said, I thought to myself, what a wonderful country. This is how we view things today. Everything should be instant and easy, not much required from us. This is the society. And unfortunately, slowly, this mentality was transferred into the church. We like easy and instant Christianity that does not require much from us. People think that all you have to do is to go to church once in a while, say a few prayers, read the Bible a few times a week, and you're good to go. But here's the real question. How does Jesus define what it means to be a true follower? Luke chapter 9, verse 23, and we all know this verse. Luke chapter 9, verse 23, and we'll conclude with this verse. If anyone desires to come after me, what does Jesus say? Let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Following Jesus takes complete and total surrender to him. It takes daily denying yourself and dying to self. So, the question that I want to leave you with today is, are you a fan or a follower of Jesus Christ? May God bless you. Amen.